with Bradley Horowitz, who's the VP of Product for Google+. And we're here to talk about Google+. I want to start out by apologizing for being late. Do you have a similar apology about Google+?
No apologies for Google+,
kidding.
but sorry we're late starting.
I'm just teasing you here a little bit, but clearly you guys are in some ways late to the social networking party. And at the same time, so one of the questions that I received from the extended O'Reilly network was from Joe McCarthy, who goes by the non-real name of @Gumption on Twitter, and he wanted to know, what's different about Google+, and why should you not be subject to social network fatigue? Now, I have my own answer, but I'd love to hear what your thinking is at Google about what's unique here. What are you bringing to the table that people should be paying attention to?
Well, I think one of the most gratifying things about Google+ has been discovering what is unique about it together with the community over the last 7 weeks. It's only been 7 weeks since we launched. I think pundits on day one, a lot of people looked at this and said, looks familiar. There's a stream, there's a profile. We've seen those before, we know how that works. And what was great is watching really over a period of a week as people started to use the system and engage with the system, to watch them discover that this was not a Me Too network, but there was something very different going on. And if I had to attribute it to one thing, I would say it is the social graph model, Circles, which really is an up-leveling of things that people have seen before. It's asymmetric and allows for these fanning or following relationships. It's symmetric and allows you to have intimate relationships with close friends as well. And they're both filters through which you consume content and targets through which you share content. And I think it took a while for people to understand that model, but as they began to express themselves through that model, they recognized that this was a very different network and could be used in many different ways, some familiar and some completely new.
Yeah, I think that's been true with all the social networks. The use cases aren't necessarily understood, and we are exploring a possibility space here, and it's not always clear what's going to work or what's going to be effective.
Yeah.
One of the things that I find most intriguing about Google+ is it really is much more integrated with my workflow. Again, maybe it's just my age, but email is still, just a major part of my workflow, and so Gmail, having easy access to sharing. I really now have two workflows. I have my third-party Twitter client, which I also use to look at Facebook and LinkedIn, and hopefully eventually Google+ when the API comes. And then I have my, effectively my Google console, which is everything from, which is my browser effectively.
Right.
And, I do find that integration to be a really compelling aspect as well, because I can move easily between these different parts of my workflow.
Yeah, that is certainly our intent, and we're really just getting started. I think the recognition that there was a common bit of real estate across your Google experience anyways, that strip at the top, which is now black and includes the link to get back to plus Tim in your case, as well as notifications so that you can see your social activity in situ, whether you're on Google Search, whether you're on Gmail. And then finally that share box, and there's some exciting opportunities coming there literally in days. That will transform how people think about that. So certainly it is our intent to make your experience as a Google user integrated with Google+, and there's much, much more to come. It feels like we're just scratching the surface of what's possible.
Yeah. Can you talk at all about, it's in this interesting middle space between, say, Twitter, which is, and blogging. For me, as a user, I find myself sharing things. It's funny, blogs have become more formal over the last decade. Used to be this was the casual sharing mechanism, and now it's more like a publication.
Right.
And that space, that casual space where you can write a few paragraphs, much like you'd write an email, but yet then it's shared in a social context, for me is really fabulous. And I'm really stunned by how much engagement I've gotten. You kind of bugged me about this when I had signed up, but I wasn't really using it. You said, "Hey, you really got to get," and here I've been writing on my blog for years, and I'm getting as many comments or more on Google+ within a few weeks of becoming active there than I had built up on with years of goodwill on the blog. So it's pretty clear there's something, a lot of people paying attention.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of why? What's the driver there, and is my experience typical or atypical?
Well, yours is certainly atypical. I wish I could promise your experience to every one of our users. But I do think what is interesting, I think there's a level of vitality in our service. One thing that's great about it is that it's incredibly fast in every dimension. So we work like crazy at Google, and especially on Google Plus, to make this a really scalable and fast service. So we focus on latency and use every bit of cleverness we know how, both in the back-end infrastructure, also the front end, how the product is rendered, and sort of gradual exposure of interface elements. We think deeply about these things to make the service fast. And the real-time nature of the commenting, what is so cool for me is to ask a question like, what should I ask Bradley at our webcast, and to watch the answers pouring in real time. And especially now with the comment collapsing, to actually have like a little ticker that sort of rolls by, watching this feedback pour in. Not to mention things like Hangouts, which are really about real-time face-to-face interaction. So I've heard Malik call it the live web or the living web. It feels like there's a certain vitality in this product, and it's not just the engagement, it's the rate of engagement and the intensity of engagement.
That's one of the things, though, when I remember when Scoble was raving about friend feed a few years back, and the great level of engagement, and I was just like, oh man, I can't handle another, super engaged stream. I can only have so many of these things.
Sure.
And yet I'm not finding that true with Google Plus, and I think it's because of that integration. It's really sort of another face of the same stream. But still, do you see that there's a bit of a concern? How much time do you have in the day for interaction? One of the things that I've really liked about Twitter is it's a way of sort of documenting and sharing my reading and things I find interesting. And I reply to all my app messages, but it's actually much less engagement, even though I have 1.5 million followers on Twitter, at least in theory. I get, I've got something like 60,000 people who've got me in circles. I'm getting, a lot more engagement in Google Plus, and I wonder at what point it becomes like, whoa, I just can't keep up.
Yeah.
And do you have any thoughts about how you're going to help manage that in the future?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts. You touched on a couple things. One, we did focus in the design of the product a lot on how could we up-level the conversation. So one of the things we noticed was that people were talking about the minutia of, stuck in traffic, still stuck in traffic, had cornflakes for breakfast, and sort of that stuff is not especially compelling just by its nature. And part of the social networking fatigue we thought was sort of getting dragged through the minutia of everyone's life. You do a lot of thoughtful posts, that's your thing. So you're not normal in that way. Most of us can't do what you do and don't have as much great content to generate.
Well, but actually the dirty secret of my experience with Twitter is I actually have 2 Twitter accounts, and one of them is for what Lisa famously called ambient intimacy. It's my family, close friends. And there it is like, I love seeing that my brother says, I just went, stair running at Stanford campus with my daughter. And I go, his daughter's home, et cetera, et cetera. It's lovely. And
we agree.
There's that divergent use case, I think, which I did with 2 accounts in Twitter. One is the mind casting. That was the other wonderful term Jay Rosen coined. And yet, Circles really has. It really, you can easily do that with the same account with the same.
That's exactly.
Dare
right.
I say, real name?
There's nothing. There's nothing wrong with this, minutia casting, if you want. The fact that the baby just spit up is probably not interesting to the 1.5 million followers. It's probably very interesting to your intimate circle. That's what Circles are for, and it sort of allows you to use the same product. The other question you had is sort of, we've understood that the stream is becoming a torrent, and it's at some point unmanageable. You sort of need to hold it back. The engagement is too much, and even the real-time nature of the stream, one of the bits of feedback we're getting again and again is, it's too fast. I can't keep up with it. It's flowing in faster than I can read it. It's jumping around. We're dealing with this stuff. It's a fairly high-class problem, but the noisy stream problem is one that we think we have a lot of technology here to solve.
And I certainly do think, there's a stage, there's sort of a use case for various kinds of social media, one in which you feel like you have to pay attention to this stream, and this stream is optional. And I know for me, one of the liberating things about Twitter was this idea that there was this wonderful stream going by, and you could dip your bucket in, but you didn't feel like you had to drink all of it.
Right.
You don't try to have tweet stream 0 in the way you try to have
it's
inbox
a losing
0.
battle. Yeah.
And so therefore, I think you have kind of some different standards. And again, it kind of comes back to an idea that I think we all need to be thinking about, which is we're trying to explore what these new technologies build in the way of sort of a social layer online.
Yep.
So since this webcast is really associated with our Strata conference, which is a technical conference on data, I want to ask you a little bit about the technical infrastructure of what you're doing. I mean, what are you doing that's what are you doing that you can share that's innovative and powerful? You mentioned, for example, the quest for very low latency. Mm-hmm. How are you doing that?
Well, again, you're sort of into territory that we consider proprietary here, and moreover, I'm probably the least qualified on the floor here to speak to our technical infrastructure. Yeah. I'm the head of product. We have amazing engineering talent, data scientists, architects. We've really brought it to bear here, and things like the low latency experience that people get don't come easy, and mm-hmm. Required some really hard trade-offs around how we built the product and how much time we took building the product. We wanted mm-hmm. to build something that was scalable to a Google-size mm-hmm. audience mm-hmm. and mm-hmm. wouldn't suffer outages mm-hmm. and sort of some of the problems that have plagued social services as they grow. Mm-hmm. We sort of knew we were in for that and wanted to architect this in a way that mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. was sympathetic to that. So, mm-hmm. we have a lot of the layers of the Google stack mm-hmm. That we're leaning on. So mm-hmm. the familiar layers of Bigtable and GFS mm-hmm. and all of that. And then a lot of proprietary software that we've built specifically for this project to make sure that we have low latency performance and scalable performance.
So do you see yourselves open sourcing any of that technology at any point?
That's not on the near-term horizon for us. That's, we open source a lot of stuff, mm-hmm. and I think especially at the level of standards and interoperability, mm-hmm. we have a pretty strong story and track mm-hmm. record there. So in one way, like the Google stack, it's hard to open source parts of it, you know, so because it is a layer cake, all sort of built on other functionality. So it's hard to sort of take a layer out of context and sort of say that would be a good thing to open source. We're sort of all in from the level of the hardware on up. Yeah. So
I would say, just putting my open source hat on, that's a potential weakness for you guys. Open source systems typically have an architecture in which people can participate in multiple layers. And I remember Linus Torvalds saying once that he, if somebody had given him the source code to Windows, he still couldn't have built the Linux kernel for it because it was all too, stuck together.
Yeah, well, it's true. I mean, there's many people here who are working on that problem and refactoring our own stack. Yeah. But we're also operating services on top of that stack. So, we have innovator's dilemma challenges too.
Yeah, nice. Speaking of that, there was a really interesting question. I was soliciting, comments and questions from other people. And Alistair Kroll, who's one of the co-chairs of the Strata conference, sent an interesting question about stacks. He specifically said at one of the Strata online conferences we ran on the personal cloud, Frank Gillette from Forrester explained how we'll choose a cloud stack the way we once chose a desktop stack. The new stack is mail, calendar, social storage, voice, video, IM, and so on, just as the old one was clipboard, printer driver, hardware setup, and the like. And of course, that actually didn't sound like stack to me. That sounds like the application suite. But there is actually a stack below that supports the application suite. And I guess the question, is do you think that's true? The internet is consolidating into a few stacks. There's the Apple stack. There's the Google stack. You could argue there's a Microsoft stack. And and then there's various flavors of kind of the startup stack, so to speak, a set of open source and cloud-based technologies that all the startups are using. How do you see that playing out over the next a few years?
Well, that kind of question is something I'd pay to go hear you talk about. I'm not exactly the expert in this stuff, but I do feel like clearly developers, users are betting on Google and the integrity of their stack, the integrity of their data, and we're trying to do right by that opportunity to both be very, very careful just in terms of how we treat that data with respect to how it's replicated, what happens when you delete it. There's all kinds of policies that I think are attendant to being a custodian of that data, as well as responsibilities for data liberation. So the guys in Chicago that run the data liberation front, I think that's a big part of the story, that if the world is consolidating into a few sort of reasonable choices one could make about where they're keeping their digital lives, we have to be good citizens in that regard and allow people with a pull of a handle to sort of up and leave and take that and interoperate. So I mentioned before standards. We've been really promoting standards and trying to drive interoperability. I heard a great story at lunch today about someone, I asked what backup software they use at home, and they said that they use an open source product that allows them to sort of point toward any S3 or S3-like instance, and they run and own that instance. It's not as if the software that they're running sort of manages that as a service for them. They install the software, they point it at their own S3 instance, and they literally manage their own data on the Amazon stack. So I thought that was a good story of how ultimately users might say, I'm all in for storage over here, and services sort of leverage that and point that, and we will get there one day.
Yeah, I'm really interested in this sort of stack concept because it's pretty clear that there is a virtuous circle. Like if you're on Apple, all the Apple services work better. Your iPhone integrates with your PC, integrates to some extent with the various cloud services they're trying to put out. And I know that in my own experience, the more Google services I use, the more other Google services I want to use. So I like an Android phone better than an iPhone because it actually integrates better with Google Calendar, for example. And that question of consolidation is there. And I think you're absolutely right to say that in that world of consolidating stacks, user freedom may not be about having your own software source code or the old ideals of open source. It really is about, can I get my data somewhere else?
Right.
And that really is this shift that we're in the middle of, people understanding that that lock-in really comes from your data more than from your source code.
Yeah.
And I guess in that context, it goes back to that open source question. If you really succeed with Google, you could presumably say a lot more of your stuff could be open source because the lock-in, comes from the virtuous circle of the data, works better with the other data from the other services, and people want to be there. And that's the kind of thing I love when it's not really lock-in, it's buy-in.
Right.
It's literally buy-in. I'm bought into this because it works for me.
That's the huge leap of faith that we take with the data liberation thing. This is exactly contrary to services that are trying to build roach motels and ant farms, and we're trying to give users choice, and they can leave and come back. We have takeout. We also have import that allows people to move their data back in, and we want users to use us because we're offering the best service in the market at any given instant, and not because they're trapped at Google.
Right, but there's another aspect of that, which is for developers, is this a platform I can build on?
Right.
And I know you guys are planning to open up some APIs.
Yep.
I believe you're not ready to announce a timeline or anything like that yet. But you will be, I assume you're hoping to encourage a third-party developer ecosystem.
Absolutely. I mean, Google has a pretty good track record in this regard. It seems to be a pretty successful strategy to be a platform, especially in the social networking space. We have early indications of some things that users can look at and understand. The games launch, for instance, we didn't write those games ourselves. Those are all partner games with 10 named partners in a whitelist situation. We have +1 buttons, which are now appearing across the web billions of times a day. So we have...
Again, there's two different kinds of APIs in my mind. One is, here you can just call our service, period. So for example, I can put a +1 button.
Right.
The other, though, is I can actually build an alternate interface. So for example, I mostly access Twitter through Seismic Desktop, Other people did through TweetDeck, which is, of course, now part of Twitter. But there was a sort of a rich ecosystem of third-party clients, which led to a lot of experimentation. And, for example, one of the reasons I like Seesmic is it actually lets me, it really is my social media console, because I can look at Twitter, I can look at Facebook, I can look at LinkedIn, and I hope eventually I'll be able to look at Google+.
Yeah, we will do that. I mean, there is no doubt. We will do that over time, and we'll probably do it in stages where, releasing read APIs before write APIs, and doing it with a deep concern for the user experience to make sure that errant apps, whether willfully malicious or accidentally breaking the system, are sort of monitored and don't spoil the experience for everyone. So I think that in a platform that is social by nature, you have to do this in a disciplined way, or else you fall victim to sort of the innovation sort of interfering with people's experience, because it is a social product, right? If I have a errant app that is blasting spam at all of the people that care about me, that's going to be bad for everyone. So we want to do that in a way that sort of not only empowers the developers to do great things, but also makes sure that users have choice in the matter.
Now, I have not yet seen much in the way of Google Plus spam. I don't know, have you had a problem with it at all in other?
Yeah, we have spam. I think circles, again, help, because to the degree that a spammer joins and cannot seduce anybody toward interacting with him or putting him or her in a circle, the spammer sort of, impotent over there on the side. It is possible through impersonation or other means of, climbing up the social ladder to sort of get spam in the system. We have both algorithmic and consumer operations folks that are looking for spam and reacting to that. But, we agree. So far, that team is doing a good job, but it's less because people haven't tried to game it. I think we've quickly become an interesting target given the scale we've achieved. But it's more a credit to the Google teams that have been anticipating this and sort of prepared for it.
So I asked for questions on Google Plus and on Twitter, and huge number of questions were about real names. You guys have taken some heat on that. Maybe you can talk to me a little bit about what you're thinking there.
Yeah, I can say a little bit about it. We certainly have taken some heat. A lot of that heat has been directed at me and Vic. And for the record, it's actually...
You guys should have had pseudonyms.
Well, I do, actually. And that's sort of one of the things I want to say. Yeah, I'm Alatable. That's a durable pseudonym I've used for, I don't know if it's 10 years, probably 7 or 8. And it's been interesting to sort of listen. And we've been doing a lot of listening. I certainly understand pseudonymity, anonymity. I am a pseudonymous user in many, many services. I appreciate the ability to go incognito and anonymous at times. I think those are use cases that we don't need to be educated about. I certainly, I've run Blogger and Flickr and understand the importance of this for the internet culture and continue to support that. When I think about Google Plus and where we're at today, both with the product and the policies, I think of many, many tranches of users that are frustrated that they can't get into the system today. And sort of a couple that come to mind. One are Google Apps enterprise users. These are our paying customers that count in the millions, and we don't let them use our newest, coolest product. And they're very, very frustrated by that. And the reason we don't is because there are certain agreements and covenants and expectations that we've set with the administrators for those accounts about how data will be stored, whether data will be public or private to the domain, et cetera. And we want to get those product things right so that when we do launch the enterprise version of Google Plus, we do it in a way that is consistent with the promises we've made and the expectations and use cases that those businesses will have and need.
And I'm glad you answered that, because that was one of the other questions. A lot of people were like, when to
I mean, man, do I feel their pain, and I promise you we're working really hard on that. That's a huge patch of users that are the last people in the world we'd want to frustrate because they bet their businesses on Google. Right. Another patch would be minors. 13 to 17-year-old people can't get in the system right now. And again, it's a
or they without lying about it.
There are none in the system at all. And it's going to stay that way until the product is ready to accommodate them. And when it is, it will have affordances for them. So
how do you verify that?
So we don't want to get into the game of verifying that per se. We want to make sure that when children come in, they don't need to lie. I think the worst case is to have a product that would encourage children to lie. We want them to come in, give us their true age, and get a great experience that's appropriate for them. So for instance, it might not be appropriate for a child to hang out with a stranger, for instance.
Yeah.
So that's a hypothetical example I want to invoke as a product change that we would consider in order to accommodate the needs of minors and serve them in our product before we would let them in. And as much as I'd like to have them in fact, it was people barely out of their teens who informed a lot of the design and implemented this product. The Google APMs and interns and engineers are sort of, a handful of years out of their teens themselves. I would love to have teenagers in the product and learn from them and sort of dialogue with them about their needs and use cases. I'm sure that's going to be a great experience when we're ready. Another category of users would be brands. We've kicked out, tens of thousands of brands that have wanted to get into the service. Would I love to have Starbucks and Nike and
O'Reilly Media?
Yeah, O'Reilly Media in there. I would love to, and we're going to. But we want to make sure that when you come in, the experience is not only good for you, the brands, but also good for the rest of the community, so that when brands enter the ecosystem, it's a great experience for both brands, the people who want to follow them, and the people that don't. So that the experience is not a vector for O'Reilly to spam. Spam.
So it's kind of interesting.
But I've avoided answering the question. I think the punchline that I want to get to is there's also a big patch of users called people that would prefer to use pseudonyms or not their common names in the product. Certainly, I've heard them. They've been very vocal, passionate, and loud, and made some wonderful arguments as to why that would be a great thing in the product. There's no moral opposition to that happening. Again, there's lots of users that we're not letting in the product now. When we get those users in, we want to do it in a way that is great for them, great for the rest of the community. We're continuing to work on that and think about how we can do that in a way that serves everyone. In the grand scheme of priorities, it's high, where the volume on this is certainly high. But there's nothing to announce today, and I'm sure that will disappoint millions.
Yeah, I'm struck by, as you talk, there's a little bit of Steve Jobs in that policy.
I don't know what to think of that.
Well, just in the sense that one of the things that Apple has done a really great job on is trying to make design decisions that aren't driven by what people think they want today, but much more saying, hey, we're really trying to design a product that's going to work, and when we get it right, we're going to give it to you. And I guess I would have to say I applaud you for focusing on trying to get it right. I guess I would also just say that in general, I feel like this whole area of social is very much up in the air. We don't know what works, what doesn't work. And I have to say my own reaction to some of the strident calls for you guys to change what you're doing has been, give me a break. Let's try some different things. Let's figure out what we learn from them. You guys aren't going to necessarily, put a stake in the ground and stick to it if it's not working. The market will tell you what it really demands. And so let's the arguments be from efficacy and not from self-righteousness. I'd love just to see where this goes. You put a stake in the ground. You start to get feedback from the market, and not feedback from the market as in, we like it, we don't like it, but actually, this goes back to the theme of data. Watching what do people do? What difference does it make? What kinds of behaviors happen on pseudonymous networks versus networks with real names?
Right.
And I think so. There's some really interesting things to be learned here by taking a position like this and seeing what happens.
Yeah, that reminds me of something Sergey said once, and I misquoted him, and he corrected me. I thought he said, "Don't listen to what people say. Watch what they do."
Yeah.
And he said, "No, listen to what people say and watch what they do."
Yeah.
Which is a much better.
There's actually that's a really good point. I think the other thing I would say about this controversy, I've become increasingly convinced that anonymity is becoming true anonymity is becoming increasingly difficult. We're leaving too many data trails which are being mined by too many people.
Yeah.
And the idea of anonymity and pseudonymity are really a fig leaf. They really are an illusion increasingly. And yes, it may be that we can be pseudonymous to our friends, but we're probably not pseudonymous to law enforcement, to government, to big marketers. They have all kinds of ways around that. And so, again, I don't know where you're going with your reaction to all the market feedback, but there is a part of me that says, let's not kid ourselves. I've been saying this in conjunction with Facebook too. We have to come to grips with a world in which it is most likely that we will not be private in a lot of contexts where formerly we were, private through obscurity. We'll walk down the street and our face will get captured on a camera, and face recognition is happening, and more and more data, on our devices. We carry a phone. We have a device where we can be traced. We are all. Back in the 50s, they would have movies about people with these bugs that would allow you to track them, and it was this big, or even not in the 50s, hell, in the 80s,
right.
And now, of course, we're all carrying one. We pay to carry one.
That's right. Yep.
And so I guess I feel like there's a lot of backward looking, oh, wasn't it nice when, as opposed to forward looking, okay, let's assume that there are use cases where we really need to be anonymous or pseudonymous. How the hell are we going to do that today?
Right.
And I think you actually you have more of a chance of doing that if you create a regime where you say, okay, well, here's what it looks like, and we're really going to have to work on that edge case.
Yeah, I think one of the great points in what you're saying is around setting expectations and truth in advertising. When you go into incognito mode in Chrome, which is really cool to have sort of a separate cookie space. I use it all the time for various experiments, but it has a disclaimer there, which is as plain English as I think these things can be, which is basically you're in incognito mode. Don't get lulled into a false sense of protection. There's a lot of hops between this browser and the data source, and based on your ISP or other files you download or other things, you can leave trails which are indelible and can't be protected by this incognito mode. I like that, and sort of making sure that we don't make a promise that we can't keep. And again, one thing I've heard loud and clear is that the stakes are very high for people, dissidents for instance, that need the affordance of this protection. You can't sort of be half-assed about it.
Yeah, so that's your point about if we're going to do it, we have to do it right.
Yeah, and similar, with brands, we're going to do it right. With enterprise users, we're going to do it right. With miners, we're going to do it right.
Or at least as close to right as you can get.
As we can get.
And we're hopefully get better.
We're not going to do something we know is wrong. We'll learn in the market.
But I also see some amount of the pushback is around people feeling like, hey, I got a non-standard name. So, for example, Violet Blue.
Yep.
It's like, hey, I just got in trouble, and it's my real name.
That's our bad. We're sorry. We fixed that particular case. I'm sure there are others where we've gotten it wrong, and that's a process that needs improving.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously that's a big part of the pushback, and then of course there's the whole question of a lot of the comments were around, you if you have an English sounding name, you're good. If you have various classes of foreign name, much more likely to be rejected. Is that something that...
It's something we need to improve. One of the reasons we're in limited field trial, I think people take limited field trial as something of a air cover move on our part, like beta sort of became a meaningless label. People applied the software. Limited field trial really meant two things to us. One is it was limited in audience, in that we've done no marketing of the product, and to get into the product you've had to have an explicit invite, which by the way weren't too easy to discover in our product to date.
Right.
So it's limited in scope, but more importantly it's limited in feature set. So we don't feel we have the requisite set of features that we need to launch. We don't feel we're launch ready, and we're not ready to sort of open the gates, let the crowds in, which is frustrating for the users that are in there now. One of the most urgent bits of feedback we get is, I need to get the rest of my friends over, and we haven't made that particularly easy or tried to do that yet. What we want to do is make sure we have the product right, we have the process improved, so that as we open up to the world, we're doing a better job of this. And so the field trial is serving the purpose of helping us learn where we need to improve, and believe me, we're on it.
It's kind of interesting when you talk about not everybody's in. One of the things I do like is that you can add an email address. Somebody doesn't have to be in there.
Right.
Have you thought about adding, for example, Twitter handles? You know, so I could basically throw a Twitter handle in there, and you do the translation as well, and send it out to their tweet stream.
Yeah, I mean,
that would be kind of cool. Again,
sure.
That's one of the things I'm looking for. Somebody's got to break this these social network silos.
Yeah. So, you know, we've done a lot of experimentation in this regard. We had the Open Social project. We had PubSub Hubbub. You know, there's various attempts to sort of build federated social networks. I think one of the reasons why Open Social was less successful than it could have been is Google wasn't really a principal in the space. We had ORCID, but it would be helpful to, you know, have an exemplary social network which sort of demonstrates to the market some of the benefits of protocols, openness, data liberation, et cetera. So we aspire to be that. It will require the APIs that we talked about and that aren't ready yet. Yeah, I think users should own their data, and if I want my data to land in another service, conceptually that should be possible.
Yeah.
So we'll get there.
You know, speaking of that, I mean, you know, obviously, I think of email as a first-class social network, and it always has struck me as, and of course, in my phone even more so is my actual real primary social network.
Right.
I have people who I can reach on my phone who I can't reach through any other vehicle. You know, my mother is not on any service but the phone.
Yep.
And you know, it seems sort of a shame to me that I can't consider, you know, my phone address book as my primary social network, and have it all fan out from there. Do you guys? What are you thinking about? Sort of all, you know, obviously you guys are a big player in phones now, and so you could potentially see, you know, phone, email, messaging, you know, circles, all as part of the same big social network.
We agree
which
with
is
you
my
completely.
real social network.
We have nothing to announce today.
Okay, I'll leave it at
you
that.
know, we sort of noticed that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, you know, clearly what ties it all together is, you know, the divisions are the technology divisions. Well, it was this technology, but what ties it all together is the data.
Yeah.
And that again kind of comes back to this idea that the data is what matters, and so normalizing the data, figuring out that, you know, the people over here are really the same as the people over here, are really the same as the people over here, is really the holy grail to me of social networking.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then taking data from one of these streams and starting to use it to inform the others.
Yeah.
You know, so that I can say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you call that person a lot. When they call you, you call them right back.
Right.
You know, that's a very special kind of circle.
Exactly. Yeah. No, I mean, you see that a little bit within what we call priority inbox in Gmail, right?
Yeah.
So you should own not only your contacts, but you should also own the analytics that underpin those contacts. And the fact that you always respond to this individual, you know, within 10 minutes of receiving the email is a signal that should offer you some benefit in return, and making sure the next time they email you, that percolates to the top. And
and you certainly are starting to use that throughout your products. I would actually love to have a little bit more in the way of an actual you know, tool that let me manage that more effectively.
I think that's a fair request.
Yeah, it could do, you know, in some sense, personal data analytics and say, show me my top contacts. Oh, wait. You know, and also I guess the other thing is just like, you know, hey, wait, you know you have the wrong phone number for that person, and over here in your email is the correct phone number. You just didn't manually update it. You know, there's got to be some real data cleaning that's really possible.
Well, you talked about
streams,
normalizing. The dirty secret of everyone I've spoken to that's worked deeply in the contacts, and particularly the sync space, is that it's hell on earth. And you know, it's much, much harder than it looks. It looks like a very simple problem to take fielded data and sort of normalize it to other fielded data. But the problems that we run into with the ancient protocols that are used to exchange this data over phones and back-end systems lead to all kinds of problems, duplicate contacts, et cetera. I think we're starting to get over that as an industry, and I think there are better approaches that will lend themselves better. Like certainly I think Plaxo was, you know, probably literally at least 5 years ahead of their time in trying to build a cloud resident social address book. We're fortunate to have Joseph Smar here, who is one of the big contributors on Circles and Google Plus in general. But you know, there's a great idea there that's not yet fully realized. And
Right. But it is in some sense part of the future you're working towards.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. Jumping more to current news, what do you think of what Facebook announced this morning?
I think it's good for users, which is exciting for us. I mean, the reason we wake up in the morning is to build great experiences for users, and I think what they did was familiar and good for users. So that's another impact that Google Plus can have in the world, is raising the bar of what the expectations and standards around something like privacy should be. So that's a great outcome. Similar to what I spoke about with Open Social, it's hard to do that just banging a drum in the wilderness. It's easier when you have a product that demonstrates, what can be.
Yeah.
And so it's good for users when the industry notices and
Bottom
realizes
line, competition is good.
Yeah.
A lot of things that were familiar when you launched Google Plus, and you'll say, well, gee, that's kind of like Facebook, and now we see some things that are kind of like Google Plus.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's fair. Yep.
Yeah, and of course, I got to put in my obligatory plug. In a world in which you have lots and lots of design patents, that gets very difficult to do. So
that's a topic I'm not prepared to discuss.
Let's not make this a worse industry for innovation, please.
Yes, completely agree.
So let me kind of look through some of these. Twitter. I have so many different question streams. I have them from Twitter, from Google Plus, from some of the questions. Mainstream versus sort of techie elite set of questions came in.
So, obviously we skewed toward the techie elite. We still skew in that direction. That's part of the launch strategy, was to start with Googlers, and you sort of know who we are. But I think we have sort of reached some of the fringes. First of all, it's a very international product. I'm not going to share exactly the proportions, but believe me, most of the usage is outside of the United States.
Well, I've heard that for Twitter too, for example.
Yeah. So that's not unexpected, but
most of the people in the world are outside the United States.
That's
so
a good point. It's not necessarily surprising.
It's actually everything that's a success metric.
Yeah. So most of the Googlers are in the United States. So it took us some time before we sort of caught up with the general trend. And it's exciting to see celebrities and not just tech pundits, but sort of real people using the service, interacting passionately. So I think we sort of crossed the chasm out of the Silicon Valley echo chamber, and we're now sort of starting to learn about what would be helpful to other communities. And they have different needs. And
I would think that, for example, Hangouts would be great for the TV watching sports community. I remember I had two friends who used to watch basketball games, on the phone together.
Absolutely.
They were sort of like, that was sort of the 80s era hangout.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
And, so you certainly see, some fabulous, mainstream use cases for shared experience.
And it's not just, sports bar sort of trivializes the thing. I was in a hangout the other day with a quadriplegic, and it didn't occur to me, this wasn't why we built the product, but one of the people in the hangout explained that it's really hard for them to operate computers generally. The interfaces are still not what they could be. And this was a really visceral means of them connecting with other people both that they know and people that they might not know, but sort of reconnecting with the world. And that's powerful and touching and unexpected. We didn't know that was going to happen.
So I know you said you didn't want to share a lot of stats, but has the Hangouts feature been, what proportion of use is sort of traditional, so stream-based versus Hangouts?
So Hangouts has been hugely popular. I think, again, really creative workarounds to some of the limitations of the product today. For instance, you can only have 10 people in a Hangout right now. So for a performer, that's not especially interesting if they're trying to acquire audience to play for 9 other folks. People have worked around that by screencasting with screencasting clients and creating a live stream of the Hangout. So there's 9 lucky fans with the performer, and then a cast of tens of thousands that are sort of lurking on the stream. And that's really, really interesting. And it also, again, we're watching, we're learning, we're understanding that, it might be that a performer wants to have this sort of tiered relationship with lurkers on one side, people interacting. there's so many great ideas we've heard for Hangouts. Things like debate format, where this person gets 3 minutes, this person gets 3 minutes. They get a rebuttal period of 60 seconds. They get a rebuttal period.
Awesome! I can just see it presidential debates on in a Hangout. I like it.
But these are sort of user suggestions that are sort of flowing into us. In terms of absolute usage of Hangouts, I think this 10-person limitation is sort of a self-limiting factor about how viral these can be and how widely they can grow. But I think there's something magic. I don't know how many Hangouts you've been in, and I'm, again, an anomaly because I'm involved with the service, so I have a lot of people that want to hang out and talk about things. So it's not a typical experience, but I can sort of post a public Hangout and have a really fantastic experience talking to people in Singapore and the Philippines and Mexico and, India. And it's that serendipity. I mean, in terms of interacting and learning with users, Sergey's listen to what they say. Hangouts have been an incredible resource to get direct feedback about our product in our product. It's very cool.
Yeah. Do you see? You brought up this interesting thing about sort of Hangout to sort of webcasting.
Yeah.
Are there other sort of hacks you've seen that are particularly interesting, or use cases that you kind of walk through? Somebody did this really cool thing. A lot of other people might want to try it.
Well, there's probably been several hundred, at least, Chrome extensions for Google+. And most of these are sort of 2 or 3 steps ahead of things that we know and intend to fix, but are sort of getting there first. I saw one the other day that was a pause button. Again, I talked about the stream being too jumpy and too real time for people. This is a button, it's a Chrome extension. You hit pause and the stream stops. And you can type in something or watch a video without it moving. That's great. I run these extensions myself. There are others that are breaking because as we change the product, they depend on CSS and things that we reserve the right to change. A lot of the bug reports, it took us a while to catch on to this, a lot of the bug reports, the first thing we need to ask are what extensions are you running, because it's typically the extension sort of failing in the light of some new change we push. And by the way, we're pushing an enormous amount of changes, which for a service of our scale is I think pretty impressive. The team is really committed towards fresh daily builds.
Yeah, I have no idea where we are in time.
We got another. We're about at 2 o'clock right now. You got a little more time.
Okay.
Yep. Sure.
Okay. Good.
Yep.
Just sort of a question about threading.
Yeah.
Do you think you'll add threading to comments? I have a nascent opinion about it that I'm not sure about.
Well, I'd like to hear that.
Okay. Well, at first I was like, gee, I'd really like to have threading. I'd like to respond to a specific comment.
Yeah. And
then it occurred to me that I'm doing a different kind of threading when I respond to somebody by name. And, I thought, maybe it's actually, a more natural thing not to have threading and just to refer to somebody. Like if you were sitting in a circle with a group of people and you wanted to address somebody specifically, you'd say, hey, Mary, you wouldn't basically go over and sit next to her, and that would indicate that your comment was meant to her.
Yeah.
You address it to her. And I thought, maybe this is actually right. At first I was thinking it was like, they didn't get to this yet. And I thought, maybe it's actually right. I don't know the answer to that yet, but it occurred to me. What do you think?
That's a brilliant insight. I hadn't thought about that. I thought, one level of threading and sort of being able to quickly understand comments in context would be helpful. Today, recall this morning, I was looking through the question thread, and there was sort of feedback about somebody's comment that used the name, the plussing in of the name as a reference. And I remember hitting, Command F and sort of having to jump through with that crude mechanism to sort of skip to all the comments about that. Which was a little
it could be,
coarse.
I guess there's different views. You could kind of just sort of say, okay, here's the way it happened, timeline view, and here's the...
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think, the whole question of comments is a fascinating one, and sort of spam and ranking, because comments sort of depend on a sequential narrative that's evolving in the comments. So it's sort of hard to sort of excise a comment and keep that narrative. So, I guess if I had answered first, I'd have said, I think threading is probably a good idea. But hearing you speak to that, I mean, maybe Maybe
there's
they
some way to
haven't thought-
rethink threading, and
Yeah.
what would it look like in a new context?
Yeah, I think again, what I love is users, and you could probably write a Chrome extension that took references by name and repositioned those comments, or at least indented them, or color-coded them, or otherwise.
Yeah.
You know, there might be many more creative ways to solve this problem than we've thought of.
Well, the other thing that I think about is, you know, again, maybe my perspective is skewed, being a fairly public person. Most of my posts are public posts. I get comments from people who I don't know, and who I get to know through their comments. And I think this is true on my blog as well. You know, there are people who I've gotten to know over the years because they comment frequently, and eventually they become familiar. And it sort of occurs to me that there's almost like a set of implied circles of that I'd almost love to see, which is like, oh, these are my, you know, my most engaged, you know, conversants.
Yeah.
You know, kind of interesting things to think about there. You know, just like how you could use the data that you know, that comes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the word implied circles or implicit circles is something that opens the door to a million great ideas. Not only the people who've engaged with me a lot on the service, or the people who would likely like to hear about kiteboarding, or the people within this geography. I mean, there's so many ways to form circles other than a manual process of, you know, organizing them or curating them by hand. You can have these implicit circles, and I think that's going to be a hugely powerful concept, and something we're very attuned to.
Yeah. So if there were one thing that you wanted to get across to the people who are paying attention to this webcast, what would it be?
Well, you've heard it before. I should look at the camera. You've heard it before. We're in a limited field trial, and your feedback is really, really important. I can't respond, or we as a team can't respond to every bit of feedback that we hear. We look for it, we log it, we register it, we triage it, and it's understood in context. So I think there's a lot of frustration with Google in the fact that there's so much opportunity here, and people are excited about the product and want to see us realize that opportunity. We're moving as fast as we can. There are parts of our product which I can't wait to announce and are not yet revealed to the world, and I think will be really significant in changing the center of gravity of the product, and changing how people think about it. These are not fixing threading, for instance, which is absolutely something we must do, but rather new unexpected features that will change how people think of the service entirely. I can't wait to launch those, and I would beg people's patience so that as we get to them, they're still with us.
So will some of these things be launched by September 13th when we get together again at Strata, New York?
Ask me that question then.
So maybe we'll have some things to announce then.
I hope so.